is one of many, many Indigenous people in this country devoting their time and efforts to the high demands that are put on them at great cost to their time and energy and economy to be in several places, often at once. He'll be in Toronto tomorrow, and yesterday he was in Hawaii working with Indigenous activists, or whatever time zone yesterday was in. And he's here with us tonight, so I do want to honor him, and I feel that we're all honored and privileged to have him here tonight to join us in a post-discussion after the screening. But let's have a warm Concordia, Montreal welcome for him, because he's here right now.
Hi. Okay, my name is Caleb Behn. I'm Metro Dene and Daneza from northeastern British Columbia, Treaty 8 territory. As always, protocol starts. I acknowledge my presence on Haudenosaunee territory and thank you for giving of your time and bearing witness. I'll be very quick. I come from unceded Kanaka Maoli territory. I haven't slept in something like 20 hours, but this stuff matters, and Politica in particular. I agreed to this taking me away from my territory and other people's territory because I believe in education, I believe in university, I believe in Montreal, remarkably. Word up. Great tattoos, this joint, which you can talk about, but you have me. You have my presence, you have my story, but you also have me, so don't hold back. You know, I gave you through this everything that I have, my territory, my family, my story, my life. So don't shy away from hard questions, okay? That's the deal. Okay, like I'm present for you, but my expectation is that you are willing to engage critically with what you witness and also what you understand in your own life perspectives in a short form. And we chat about it afterwards, okay? So you have me. Be brave, step up, ask me hard questions. You're probably not going to offend me. We'll see. The Indian Act. So, like, I chose law because it's a tool. Like, I'm a fairly pragmatic human. And actually, I'll show you guys, because I got a bunch of these here, but on my body, you see expressions of Indigenous law. So all of my ink is an expression of Indig law. And as mentioned in the film, you know, I'll use the law as a mechanism to initiate change, but it's not, you know, the end all and be all. So in my view, like, repealing the Indian Act is a really, like, convenient phrase, but if you've ever tried to repeal legislation that dates to like 1867 and the very founding of this country, like, that's challenging. That's bordering on like constitutional amendment kind of territory. And the thing is that in this day and age, the systems of disempowerment are so complex and sophisticated, any mechanism that's seemingly good, such as consultation or, you know, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission or whatever else, becomes a Trojan horse to enact another kind of policy, right? Which is why I'm wary of the Liberal government. That's why I'm wary of all kinds of things. So, you know, it's a very interesting statement, and I think I would be down with the repeal if my people and you people were like really locked down and solid in our like post-colonial thinking, and we had developed like alternative economies and perspectives and theories and mechanisms and choices and systems to replace that bullshit. But until we have that, I dare not go down that road, because it becomes a mechanism to just create something even more challenging. First Nations Safe Water Drinking Act, you know, Harper government. You know, but a little point, like, Harper appointed about 600 of the 840 approximately sitting federally appointed judges in this country. You know, the Trudeau government has a lot more to deal with than just legislation. So, you know, I'm down with the legislative fight, but, you know, I wear different things to remind me of what's important to me, and I think that's kind of the starting point for that larger discourse, in my view. I'm respectful of the idea, but I'm wary. But the thing is that the systems of disempowerment are so well structured after 600 years of kind of industrial development that any action to dismantle it or disrupt it that's not really tactically designed to engage multiple mechanisms of change concurrently innately feeds into the coercive mechanism it uses to legitimate itself, right? So like there was bombings in my territory in 2000, 99, 2008. All those bombings did was just legitimate a very coercive structure of RCMP, CSIS, and security forces recruited out of returning forces from Afghanistan, plus the fucking bikers. So like, you know, I'm down for the scrap, but that's a very foolish decision in the short term. Hence the necessity of finding other structures. You know, and I work in the law, but I'll never describe everything that I do publicly, ever. Because I engage in spiritual endeavors, I engage in physical endeavors. Like I was just, you know, this hat right here is a gift because I was hunting pigs in Kanaka Maoli territory this week on Oahu, chilling with these indige homies there. And what they're doing is they're reclaiming food sovereignty. They're claiming kalo, like the taro root. And that hat describes a phrase that was used when the U.S. tried to annex Hawaii. And they said, we're satisfied with just the stones when they offer them all this money. What they're meaning is that they just need nothing more than their own land. And I think those kinds of endeavors are relevant. You know, as someone, especially an institution like this, you recognize that like everybody, including the Raging Grannies, has an obligation, has something to offer, whether it's art, whether it's, you know, media arts in particular, filmmaking, stuff that you work on, academic inquiry, hard sciences. I have some friends in the audience who do hard sciences. You know, everyone has a role in this. The thing is that no one's really strategically planning how to coordinate all those multiple mechanisms of change. And that has to happen. That's like, that has to happen or else we're fucked. And like, if you look at ambient CO2 concentrations, we're in trouble. You know, if you look at like the decline of species, you know, biodiversity across the globe, the number of rivers that are dammed, I mean, any kind of indicia of human impact on the natural world indicates that like we are in some serious issues. So my thing is like, you know, I'm down with the rage, but you got to channel it in a very like strategic way. And law school, in hindsight, probably wasn't the best thing to do, but you know, I'm done. So, you know, it's kind of one of those path dependency issues. I think I have like escalating commitment errors for the psychologists in the room. Anyways, yeah, but it's cool. Hold on to the rage, but just don't let it eat you up. The other thing is like, you know, like I drank way too much in fucking law school. Like that's a personal consequence of what I do, right? Because I got to like handle all my like never-ending rage. And that's something I didn't understand, especially like as a man. Like there were some references, and one of the things we were talking about before this, and I'll just quickly mention it. My great disappointment in this film is that we didn't do enough to articulate the connection between destruction of land and destruction of women. And like it was just, and I had like, word, yeah. So another point, like I was the only Indigenous person on this team, despite begging the homies to like have Indigenous people involved. They mined me, they mined my story. They used me and my story the same way the industry uses the land. And I'm sure at Cinema Politica, this is, you know, something that comes up, right? So it's a tough situation because at the same time, that endeavor created something that you just described, that rage, that connection. And that speaks to this kind of ongoing challenge of figuring out what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And I don't have a lot of answers, to be honest. I kind of regret some of my choices, but I also acknowledge the failures and hope that in the acknowledgement of the failures, we start developing a discourse, hence making that point about the destruction of land, the destruction of women that I view as a personal failure for the film, a failure for the directors, and a failure for the message. But being honest about that's useful. Maybe being like hella courageous and vulnerable and like in front of 700 people is a good step. Interesting. So like 3 weeks ago, I met the chair of the Canadian Council of Academies, the research unit that did kind of the biggest analysis of shale gas development and hydraulic fracturing in Canadian history. And there's one in the UK, there's one in Germany, there's one in France, there's one here in Quebec. There's a few others. And, you know, for those of you who don't work in kind of my field, you might have come across the term regulatory capture. I encourage you to Google that shit. Check it out. Like, because regulatory capture describes a theory that came out of like an economic analysis, actually, that says that any entity that's regulated will seek to control that which regulates it. It's a useful investment for me to try and manipulate the regulator. It's a good investment. It's just a raw financial calculus, right? Like, and you can look at like smoking lobby, the milk lobby, the gun lobby, the oil and gas lobby. Like, there's a million examples. And the thing is, in this country, you know, evidence from a legal perspective, especially in the context of predictive health sciences, which is something I'm very interested in because of fracking's impact on water and health at a systems-wide level. Endocrine disruptors, very bad news. The long latency period between illnesses, the degree of scientific uncertainty, and the nature of scientific proof relative to the political discourse is such that we don't get effective policy. And that phrase, like science-based policy, I mean, that's a wonderful idea, yet it requires some fairly systemic changes to how we conduct our business. And in British Columbia, we are the antithesis of science-based policy. We actually, our policy is based on a lack of science. That's how they legitimate what they do. I think it was Isaac Newton who said that, absence of proof is not proof of absence, and yet that's the reality where I come from. And the thing is that if you calculate, like, a dark-skinned brother, who's going to get exposed to all those endocrine disruptors and BTEX compounds, right? Like you never let that shit happen in, Ottawa or Victoria or New York. Well, maybe New York, but, they got a moratorium on. But you know what I mean? Like you're not going to get that environmental injustice. And that's the thing, that environmental injustice, regulatory capture, and all these processes describe the mechanisms by which we disempower those who are less privileged or less able to articulate their interests relative to a power structure. And that's a truth. So do you act like the sister here and get rowdy and disincentivize and detonate some shit? Maybe. But then what comes after that, right? And so the whole analysis of like why we have this situation naturally entails probably all the fields of study collectively in this room. It's everything from the iconography. Remember that picture of that guy like showing those kids that fracking cake? Fucking terrifying, right? Like that's Edmonton. Like I think that was Calgary, that one actually. But at every level of analysis, we manipulate the messages, and that's why actually one of the reasons why I agreed to come at Ezra's invitation, because I'm interested in the discourse. I'm interested in iconography. I'm interested in image and discourse as it relates to money and toxicity and power. I think that's a really important area to look at in this day and age, in my view, because we are insane as a species. Respectfully, I'll slightly disagree because, like, when this film started, it was October 27th, 2010. On Commercial Drive, of all places, in Van City, is where I met the directors and agreed to this insanity. This is a great way to like mess up your young law career. Do this. But at that point, like the LNG industry was like a foregone conclusion. The Christy Clark Liberal government like staked their political future on LNG by now. There's yet to be final investment decisions for any of the LNG pipelines or any of the LNG plants, plus Enbridge. And we'll see what happens with Energy East and Line 9. But respectfully, like economics played a huge role. The crash of 2007 definitely did some things. The current the OPEC policies right now, we'll see what they do in the next 18 months or so. But the economics had a big piece of it. But resistance has played a huge role. And what's interesting to me is that generally the media undercuts and systemically denies the profundity of that large-scale diffuse resistance and what it's done. However, in the field I work in, I kind of, I see the other side of it. Like when I came in here, I met Ezra for a quick pint before I came on stage, so I get hella nervous. Not really, actually. I'm like an onion of like insecure and awesome. Insecure at the core, but there's layers. And titanium. But we were talking, like I was on a conference call with My Nations trying to figure out what the hell to do on the Site C mega project, the third dam on the Peace River in my territory, jacking like a ton of important land, and like we cannot stop this beast. We've tried pretty much everything, including direct action, and so there's this kind of dual thing where like I see the resistance and I see like a lack of final investment decisions being made, and I understand that that's huge and important and critical. The Chilcotin decision, the legal actions, all that stuff is huge. But then there's this like creeping systemic push, and my belief is that the power structures that created whatever we have now in modernity in the form of like free market liberal capitalism, industrialism, like I don't call it whatever you want. Like I would call it Babylon because I was raised in a hyper-Christian tradition, interestingly. That thing is heavy. It moves. It has path dependency. It's weighty, and it doesn't stop easily. And like, my friend Kai Nagata, who works for Dogwood Initiative, he said this interesting thing a couple of years ago, that the only thing that defeats hierarchies is networks. And if you imagine this massive ship, like, going over like a waterfall, you need a network, like a net, to catch it. And the thing is, that net is composed of all of us. But there's so many things that would compel you to do otherwise, right? And that's the other personal side of this. One of the reasons I love Montreal, I come here for a lot of my ink, is, I find this place to have a lot more willingness to go into direct action. We announce privilege, but yeah, I don't see a lot of you homies in my territory, where the big trucks and the bikers and the money is. And that's, that's a thing. There's a lot of resistance here, but what is it, what's the next step in this evolution of like, doing better for our species? And I don't have answers for that. So respectfully, I hear what you're saying. The economics had a big role, but there's other things happening. And I don't think we even fully understand all the
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, all the dynamics. One other point I wanted to make quite quickly is there's a whole spiritual side to this too, right? So you can't see it, but like the scars on my chest, I did the flesh offering a couple of years back. I sundanced at Saguin at the invitation of an elder named Dave Corshane. And I danced for 4 days, no food, no water, in the sun. And I know what true thirst is. And my prayers said consistently were about honor and integrity and accountability for my land. And while I'm not like, kind of like crystals and chemtrails and stuff, not to disrespect anybody, but I believe in that spiritual side of it. And the thing is, like, especially in the Indigenous community, but other places as well, there's people engaging in spiritual endeavors, like, deeply. In this film, followed protocol. We put down tobacco, like, from the first. And I think that's one of the reasons why it moves you the way it does. Because we followed protocol, and I think that's another part of it that's, it's intrinsically individual, but also massively collective, and I don't have a whole handle on that. I just know that, like, I put down my tobacco, I say my prayers, I give gifts to water, and I try to hold that as much as I hold, like, the tactical media relations and the litigation strategy, right? It's that collective. So, like, I would never disclose the whole of my strategy publicly. Like, I to be quite honest, like, like, this sounds really strange. I don't even conceptually put together everything I'm thinking of. And it's because it's hard to articulate. It's a spiritual thing. If you give something a name and you give it the power of your voice, you can kill it sometimes. And these are very delicate strategies. These are very delicate things, interconnected webs of action and movement and ideas and strategy. The quick answer, one of the persons in this room, we're doing a bunch of predictive health science analysis on fracking. I'm also doing a bunch of fugitive methane analysis to really disrupt the messaging on how this is like a transition fuel when it's actually like super bad for the climate. We're lining that up with litigation strategies. We're opposing all the feedstock mechanisms, so both the pipelines and the major dams are powered up, social media engagement strategies, and then large-scale litigation strategies for all of like the little licenses and that kind of thing. Also building land-based sustainable resistance in the form of guardian watchman programs to really amplify the data collection abilities and land-based resistance functions of my people. We're also trying to litigate on the basis of species at risk because this shit destroys the high mountains, it destroys natural environments because of the massive linear disturbance. So like one of the things I'm doing, this is a pretty controversial point, but I'm paying my hunters $400 a tail for wolves in certain mountain valleys to protect the last 17 breeding females of caribou, a very rare subspecies in my territory. And it kills me. I hate it. I hate paying people to kill my people because it teaches my young men the wrong way. But at the same time, like this is an utterly unique genome that we need to protect. These are the harsh decisions of a time like this. So those are some of the things we're working on. I mean, this is a mechanism to engage because I think you guys understand a little bit more now. Little point, by the way, my territory produces a lot of the condensate that goes to the tar sands that will create the diluted bitumen that will come to your territory. And this is a point I made to La Presse like 3 years ago, quite publicly. That's interesting that like Quebec would allow a moratorium and then accept gas from other places. Like that's a profound hypocrisy. You know, it's okay from my territory because it's chock full of brown people, right? Like, you know, that I find that troubling. And so that personal accountability word, thank you. that personal accountability and that statement of accountability is a part of it. And one of the things I really try and do, like as a man, like an individual, is be accountable as much as I can be. And it sounds so strange because it's hyper individualized, and yet it really is a piece of this larger work to disrupt. If I can be honest about my failures, I can critique openly the components that allow for this mindset, and I think that's important, because it's a jungle out there and there's beasts and they will consume without end. Well, one, like I try every single day to just like do an intentional act to acknowledge creation, and usually it's putting down tobacco. I don't cope well. I live in a very high stress, hyper adversarial environment. My world is war by other means, to paraphrase Clausewitz. And so I don't deal well. But I have a big family. I've got a really like the most handsome dog ever. No, I'm not lying, guys. Like so handsome. And my family takes care of me. My homies, my friends, my network grounds me. But like I'm right on the edge, and like I almost killed myself 3 times in the filming of this movie because of the interpersonal issues, because of the infidelity issues, because of like I stepped into male accountability like in front of 3,000 people on Facebook during an MMIW thing, being like I need to be acknowledged, like saying like I'm not a good guy. And that was really crazy because I hit a lot of lateral violence from the Indigenous decolonization community in the West Coast, and that happens, and that's legit. As a man, I got to own that, but that like literally almost killed me. So don't think like I'm like a healthy, balanced human. Like I'm right on the edge, hence going to Kanaka Maoli territory for a week and like hunting pigs and swimming. It's getting back to the land is the only thing. But my day-to-day is messed, and that's something I think we all gotta stand together and kind of acknowledge and like help each other with self-care, and your kind words, Masi Cho, for that. Appreciate it. Nishnabekwe, sister. So on February 29th, like 2 weeks ago, a little bit more, BC enacted the Water Sustainability Act. And to reference that point earlier about like Trojan horses, there's a position here. The Water Sustainability Act is actually a mechanism to commodify both surface water and groundwater in perpetuity and claim it for the province. So I'm working on trying to reverse that legislation. On the Fed side, there's a lot of direct advocacy to the various ministers and some litigation going on just to try and engage with, the more egregious implications of C38 and C45. But the frank truth is, I mean, like I said earlier, displacing legislation creates a space where you can get even worse legislation. It's not like these jackasses don't have really good lawyers and highly intelligent people who are like able to be like, hey, why don't we add like a market-based incentive for the efficient use of water and hydraulic fracturing? Combine that with NAFTA and you find, or WTO or GATT, and you find some very interesting dynamics where you've commodified an essential resource, right? Any resource that goes into a profit-making imperative that has cross-border implications becomes by definition a component. Now there's differing analyses. My friend Andrew Gage at West Coast Environmental Law did an analysis on this Water Act in BC and said that it doesn't trigger NAFTA, so we're not going to get cross-border litigation. That's an optimistic characterization, but the guy's like a legendary lawyer, so I trust his opinion. On the water thing, like it's something I'm deeply involved in. I'm hoping to hear in a $2.5 million shirt grant that myself and my mentor put forward in April to decolonize water governance in Western Canada. And so if we get that, we're going to train, 40, 50 students, a couple postdocs. There's like 50, 60 articles, a couple books, a whole bunch of work we're going to do. But that's just one piece of it. I don't have answers on water. The more I learn, the less I know. And I don't know what to do about it except pray and work real hard and be hella strategic. One thing in my territory is, because we're so deeply colonized, we don't die on the hill anymore. We're treaty people, right? So we promise to live in peace. And that's frustrating sometimes because the water is like the prophecies of my ancestors say that the last great war we fought in Denendeh over water on the shores of Great Bear Lake. Like that's not an implausible potentiality because pipelines can easily be retooled to carry a lot more than natural gas, right? Like, what do you do when the gas runs out? It's not like they decommission pipelines, like, oh, we'll put it back. Like, no, they put something else in it. It's what they always do. No, the water thing is like it's end game for the species. And I say that literally. Like that's the end game side, and I don't know how to answer that. That's a tough one. It scares me. So if you want to, just go check out the website, keepersofthewater.org. We're online. Just Google Keepers of the Water. You'll find us. That organization, the truth is that organization, what I did is like I agreed to take it over and resource it and fundraise for it and rebuild it because it's huge and it's had a decade of huge meetings all over the Northwest Territories, BC, Alberta. But I intend to hand it off to an Indigenous woman because an Indigenous man can't head up an organization that's dedicated to water. It has to be an Indigenous woman, and that's like a strategic thing. It's a spiritual thing. It's just how it has to be. So I'm using my network and this kind of thing and other things just to resource it. It's I'm building the thing to hand it off. But check out the website. We do some cool stuff. What we can do, and I get this question a lot, and the truth is, frankly, it's not my place to dictate to you what it is that you can do. I think you know better than anyone what you're capable of, and seeing, that you brought your young child with you to something like this. I mean, in our culture, I was trained to hunt by hunting. I got my first gun, like not a pellet gun, like a gun, at 4 years old, and we were given like the power to make mistakes, but to learn really deeply. And I think that type of education is really important in this day and age because we live in a society that refuses to give power and thus does not teach accountability in a very like internalized way, like nothing like scars to make you like remember, like don't play with guns, like that kind of thing. So I think it's up to you to decide how best to engage. But one of the first steps is to educate yourself. And Cinema Politica is a good place to do it, but there's lots of other places as well. Yeah, no, of course. Well, and there's the clicktivism issue, right? Like the Facebook generation, the touchscreen generation is all about like the image, but what does that really do? I mean, you can, pitch on like GoFundMe or fundraiser or whatever, but what does that do? In my opinion, I think it's like a really critical education, an unrelenting like pursuit of as much as you can, like ethical, grounded knowledge, and then finding the spaces where you can put what you have to work. Because the thing is, like, if you're based here, you probably can't come to my territory. But if you raise your, but if you raise your child well, and if you educate those around you and write a few letters and maybe make the odd donation, that's a lot more than most people are doing. And if it's done in a good way, in a really grounded way that like seeks to really critique and understand, I think you'll find that you make a significant difference. Like, for example, we're crowdfunding for huge litigation in my territory, and we've raised a couple hundred G already. And this is litigation that like you guys can't do. You don't have either the jurisdiction nor the rights that we can do. So we need people to pitch for us to do these things because I'm having to not build a palliative care unit for elders in my community because I'm too busy fighting a jackass government using white lawyers. Like, this is the quid pro quo. I've got black mold in my grandma's house, but I can't rebuild her house because I have to go, pay for litigation to protect the land. And the thing is, we need people like outside of it who have privilege and resources to assist. It's a tough one. It's a real tough question.
And just is it worth getting status?
The status question. In the short term, yes, but it's not an answer. Status is nothing more. Status is a colonial construct, but if you don't use it, you can't take that construct and plant a seed beneath it that's something bigger and deeper and better. The card in my pocket does not dictate what I am. I'm Metro Dene and Daneza. I'm not 54300555701, which is what it says in my pocket. But I will use that number and what comes with it to protect and cherish a small piece of something that is a piece of a larger seed. Decolonize, right? But I would say do it because it's important. It's also right with fraught with peril, though. There's all kinds of ethical issues on the status question, huge problems. So the rights of Pachamama, or in Aotearoa, the giving of legal personhood to the Whanganui River. Very interesting. I like the idea of developing the law because it's the substrate of this society. It's actually like the bones of this society in some ways, and they're not quite healthy. Indigenous law, in particular, for those of you with a social science orientation, look up John Boros, look up Diaga Alfred, look up Glenn Coulthard, Sarah Hunt. There's a bunch of theorists in the West, especially, but also in Haudenosaunee territory that are really working on indigenous laws, which totally invert the notions of kind of human dominion over nature. I worked with David Suzuki and that group on the Blue Water, what the hell was it? The Right to a Healthy Environment work. Yeah, Blue Dot Tour. So that behind that tour is a whole legal strategy to get a constitutional amendment, which works through a certain theory of social change out of Harvard called the Gans theory of social change. Some of you guys are probably familiar with it. And the idea was that cities like Montreal would initiate the right, which is not really legally compelling but interesting, and then eventually provinces and territories, and then together we would advocate for the federal government because you need to have a supermajority to get constitutional amendments of that nature. So there's theories there, but the thing is, and I said in the movie, we don't have generations to get it right. That's my problem. That's why I litigate. That's why I finance what I can through my work, because like stall tactics, as they like stall out and increase the cost of non-renewable energy, give time for renewables to come online and for people to stop being assholes, right? And so like if those two things happen, then we can kind of stop the douchebaggery. Sorry, I'm a foul-mouthed bastard as well. I apologize. Just do not emulate my style. But that's the truth. I think delay tactics, making the real cost of things apparent, advocating for like really progressive, interesting, different legal theories about how we interrelate, all of that leads to something. And I'm not sure if it's a cause and effect analysis, but there's something there, and I can't even fully articulate it. I feel it. Like I can tell that we're almost there, and we got the Tesla batteries, and photovoltaic prices are going down, and there's so much there. But at the same time, you're dealing with the beast. You live in the belly of Babylon. This is a place. I was listening to an interview with John Trudell, and he said that in this day and age, late John Trudell, you got to protect your spirit because you're in the place where spirits get eaten. And if you look at like all those dead-eyed people who like just consume, and think about the money and nothing else, like that seems apparent. So behind all of that is this personal endeavor to protect oneself. So. I was dumb enough to sign one of the largest book deals for unpublished Indigenous authors in Canadian history last year, but I have yet to write anything, which is one of the reasons, because I'm doing this stuff. I swear to God, like I'm rocking insane days. So I've actually stopped doing so much work and started saying no a lot more.
Good.
And I'm writing, but the thing is that this is the curse, and this is a reference to the earlier question about self-care. I was never taught to believe that we're going to make it. I was never taught, like, our prophecies don't end well for this species.
The evidence is kind of compelling.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. Like that's the thing that, like, I'll kick the darkness till it bleeds daylight, but I'm not a full-on believer in the sanctity of this species. And so I'll try, and I'll never stop trying, but at the same time, like, I don't think we're the top, we're the bottom. And there's no rule that said we had to make it. Look at the violations you've done all over this planet. And that troubles me because it's easy to slip into this kind of nihilistic perspective. So my creative endeavors, and I appreciate creative people in the room, Musty Cho for that is critical, but they suffer in the face of that.